With respect to, because I find that there's the public part of it and then there's the private, which is something you did mention, the fact that, there's those who are supposed to be regulating the sector, and then there's also the part of the consultants, for example, the builders. But then there are people who import these things into the country. Where would you say that you have seen potential bottlenecks or loopholes, areas where, because they shouldn't even find themselves into, these things shouldn't find their way into the country in the first place. Somebody is signing off on these things, saying, oh, it's cleared and you can now sell, or you can now bring it into the Nigerian market. Have you seen a level of distortion in this regard? I don't want to become very but I mean urban shelter has existed for 30 plus years. The house my father has in the village is still standing. I don't see those cracks on the wall. You know that whenever we walk into the house, you know that it's a house. The plumbing is perfect. Let's start with the plumbing, because I find that the houses sometimes that we see these days, you say you did your house warming, or this, and then the next thing you see some parts of the house leaking. What's going on in this space really? What have you seen? What do you think we need to start having more conversations about that we are not talking about yet?
So you mentioned, for instance, the influx of institutional products, and to be completely open, these products are substandard. Mm-hmm. And I won't mention names, but they're coming from a certain part of the world where there isn't that much regulation, and in Nigeria we're taking them in. I'll use an example of what we experienced during, God rest her soul, Madam Dora, Akunyili. There was a point in Nigeria where drugs, medication was just flooding in across the world. We were the dumping ground for it. She came in, took charge, and sanitized that whole industry. You need a similar approach also when it comes to building materials and standardization. I used the word standardization earlier. You need people, organizations like Manufacturing Association of Nigeria to come in, to have certification processes, not so much to create bottlenecks, but to be able to sample, to be able to certify, to be able to assure that the products that are coming in are up to the standards that Nigerians are expecting. And as Nigerians, I think we deserve that. But when you talk about these kind of things that are coming up in the industry, the substandardness is because really it's the poor quality of inputs that goes into the
production
that leads to this. Now, unless you have a company that will take account for this and say no, it might be cheaper, but I know that this is not something that I want to have as part of our business. Unfortunately, we'll continue to see that. So we have to hold companies accountable. In Urban Shelter's case, we've been doing that for 30 years. So it's something that's become imbibed in our culture, that sense of credibility and integrity, to do the right thing at the right time, because I need you to buy buildings successively.
Yes.
It's part of our business plan, as opposed to I'm in here for kind of an arbitrage, do one building and then run. And hence these kinds of these problems. But it does need an intervention. It's possible, just like I said, we've seen it in the drug and medication industry. So it's also possible for the real estate industry. But it's going to need a whole lot of political and leadership as well to say this is the right time to take stock of this.
We've been seeing an increase in the number of houses that are collapsing, particularly in Lagos State. I must say, do we currently have anything at all, or any platform where we can go check and see blacklisted organizations or blacklisted real estate companies that you shouldn't work with because they were the ones responsible for this construction until it collapsed? Because if the reward for wrongdoing surpasses the risk of doing that which is wrong, you see more of it coming up, which is what we are currently experiencing.
Sure. I can't say 100% whether or not there is one, unfortunately, but I'm not aware of a platform. What you can do is, if you are planning on buying a property from Irene and Daughters Construction Company, and it's based in Lagos, there are three agencies that handle the process for what we call government control. And so you can go through, they should be able to give you copies, both the company and the government agencies should give you things like copies of the building approval, material schedules, and so on and so forth. Now, if you see a stamp from the government, it should give you a relatively sound, safe haven to know that, okay, this organization knows what they're doing. In as much as possible, I always advise people, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it's a duck. Be very careful. Don't expect that duck to be an eagle. So look at the history of that company. I'm seeing a lot of billboards in Abuja. And I always get concerned because there are more billboards in Abuja that are for real estate than anything else. And I get very concerned when I see this. It's your money. By the way, once you say, I want to marry so-and-so, the biggest decision you make is I'm going to buy a house. That's the next biggest decision. That's the next kind of financial outlay you make. You should be very selfish about the kind of property you buy and whom you buy from. Checks and balances. So you do one from the government, just make sure do they have all these approvals. Also check the trajectory of this company. What have they done? What are people saying about them? Real estate is like farming. It's either there or it's not. You can't go and pretend there's a building where there isn't a building. You can't go and pretend that this company has done 4, 5, 6, 20 estates. They've either done it or they haven't. So it's easy to kind of verify. But if you're talking about a formal platform like a registry for blacklisted companies, I can't say 100% that there is one. I don't believe there is, but please, your audience might want to get in touch. I want to say a comment about the Real Estate Association of Nigeria. The headquarters is here in Abuja, but they're trying to have coverage across all of Nigeria, and they do have satellite offices in Lagos and other places. And it's an organization set up essentially by private companies that are, what they're trying to do is to make sure that they have companies that are legitimate, they register with them. They also have registry about blacklisted companies that people can buy from or work with. So that is not government-led, it's a private-led initiative, but I know that they're trying to also try and get some kind of legislation. It's a balance, I'll say this publicly though, because you don't want to create more bottlenecks for real estate companies, because bottlenecks creates additional costs and then will be passed on unfortunately to the client. So it's a balance you're trying to make where you ensure you're providing best service, best products for the client. When it comes to real estate, of course, that means their safety and their security. But I hope we're reaching that. I think we are getting that. It's taking obviously more time than it should.
Before we go on the break, I think it's also important to know for those people who want to start to, invest in real estate, purchase their first properties, either as a family or, single individuals. What are those documentations that are so important, not just for them to have, but the institution or the real estate company that they intend working with on this journey?
So again, if you're purchasing your first house, you want to look at the history of the company. If the company started yesterday, you should be very mindful. If it's been on for 30 years, you should look at it. Word of mouth is very important. The Abuja and the Lagos markets are actually quite small. How did you find dealing with this company? How was your experience in the purchasing process? How was your experience in the handover, facility management, and so on and so forth? That's another one. It might not seem like that's black and white, but these are very, very important because these are not responses you get on paper. These are people's real life experiences that they will share with you. Hence what I mentioned, also past projects are important to check. What is this company's capacity? When you're coming into the office, is it an office or is it somebody's backyard? These are things that should get us thinking. And then when you come to documentation, you're ensuring that this particular project, was there a signed agreement? If it's a partnership, if the land is owned by the company, can you have a copy of the CFO? Is it in their name? If not, why not? They're giving you your money. I'm essentially working for urban shelters, 4,000 or 5,000 clients that we have right now. They have a right to ask me these things, and I shouldn't be defensive about it. So we've done CFO, we've done agreements. You can do a search on Aegis if you're based in Abuja for Abuja land. If it's Lagos, there's land registry. You can also search to make sure Lagos is very organized because they also will give you all the history, just like Abuja. Kaduna also, I know, have set up something like CADGIS. They also have a digitalized system. Unfortunately, the entire kind of system for digitalized land in Nigeria is only about 10-15%.
Wow, that's low.
It is low, but you could do it old school and go through the documentation in each of the ministries of the state, depending on where you are, to double check. So we've now mentioned Aegis, we've mentioned the company itself and their history, we've mentioned that documentation. Approval. If the company says they're building 500 units in Dawaki, please ask for the approval. So that to make sure it's not 5,000, and actually it's not even in Dawaki, it's in Suleja. These are checks you can see to do that also. When you're buying from that company, is there a brochure? Are they asking you for documentation? You'll notice that companies that are doing the right thing will also ask of you. They're not just wanting to collect your money, they're asking for copies of your own ID, your own certification, who you are, they want to know you, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole process that I think you can work with to actually make sure that you know what you're buying and that you're buying the right thing. But these are just kind of the high level documents that you can ask. Building plans, site plans, and so on and so forth. Inquiries, absolutely. Word of mouth, very important. And any of the agencies that kind of are in charge of construction in that particular location. In Abuja, it's things like the FCDA, it's things like ages and so on and so forth.
I mean, I think these are very detailed things. So if anybody wants to get on the, on the building project with any of those companies, it's so important that they're aware of this thing. So you don't work in ignorance and then you realize that 3 people haven't allocated one land. Terrible. But thank you so much. We'll just take a quick break now and we'll be right back.
Thank you very much.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back.